What's up, Bears fans? It's your boy Fave, back with Faves, and we've got 3 genuinely massive stories breaking across the rest of the NFC North right now, and every single one of them touches Chicago in some way. A former first-round quarterback who might already be as good as gone, a defensive back who just got released under the most shocking circumstances you'll hear all offseason, and a star pass rusher whose recovery timeline could directly decide whether he's even on the field the next time he lines up against the Bears. So let's get into all of it division by division because there is a lot to unpack here. Let's start in Minnesota because the writing genuinely does appear to be on the wall for JJ. McCarthy, according to analyst Winston Wilcox, it seems unlikely that Carson Wentz re-signed with the Vikings just to sit as the third-string quarterback this season, and it seems just as unlikely that Kyler Murray signed with Minnesota purely to be a backup either. Put those two signings together, and it paints a pretty clear picture of where McCarthy's job security actually stands heading into training camp. Now, the one thing keeping McCarthy's seat warm for the moment is that both Murray and Wentz carry real injury history. So there's still a scenario where circumstances force Minnesota's hand. But outside of that variable, the going belief around the league right now is that McCarthy is as good as traded already. Wilcox specifically floated the idea that only a team desperate enough like the New York Jets would be willing to gamble on a former first-rounder with McCarthy's injury history, though he also pointed to the Arizona Cardinals as a realistic landing spot for a couple of very specific reasons. And I want you to sit with that for a second, Bears fans, because this is absolutely wild when you remember that Chicago was reportedly among the teams that had at least some level of interest in McCarthy a few draft cycles back before ultimately landing on Caleb Williams instead. Look at how that decision has aged. McCarthy, the 10th overall pick, missed his entire rookie season recovering from a torn meniscus. Then started in 2025, but was limited to just 10 total games across 2 years due to a string of injuries, including a high ankle sprain, a concussion, and a broken hand along the way. His numbers during that limited action were rough, throwing for 1,632 yards with 11 touchdowns against 12 interceptions and a completion percentage sitting right around 57.5%. That's simply not the production profile of a guy who's locked into a starting job anymore, especially not with the genuine competition now looming. Going deeper into what actually pushed Minnesota toward this fork in the road, Wilcox pointed specifically to Arizona's own quarterback uncertainty as an opening. If Jacoby Brissett can't get his contract situation resolved down in the desert, the Cardinals could view acquiring a younger arm like McCarthy as a low-cost developmental swing rather than burning a premium draft pick at the position. And that's exactly why the compensation being floated for McCarthy is shockingly light, with some reports suggesting Minnesota might only be able to command a 5th-round pick, or a 5th and a 7th combined, rather than anything resembling a true return for a former top 10 selection. Think about that for a second. A former top 10 pick dealt away for what basically amounts to day 3 draft capital. That's a staggering fall from where McCarthy started his career, and it puts into even sharper focus just how well the Bears' own quarterback decision has played out by comparison. Now, I do want to add a layer of nuance here, because McCarthy himself has actually pushed back pretty directly against the idea that he wants out. Speaking with reporters during minicamp, McCarthy made it clear he sees Minnesota as exactly where he wants to be, saying he loves the organization, loves the coaching staff, and loves his teammates, and that everything about his situation has played out the way he wanted it to. So this isn't a case of a disgruntled player publicly demanding a trade. If a deal happens, it's much more likely to be a business decision driven entirely by the front office rather than any kind of forced exit. Still, according to some anonymous front office sources who've spoken with reporters covering this story, there's a belief growing around the league that McCarthy privately wants a fresh start once those Murray and Wentz signings became official, regardless of what he's saying publicly for now. Let's dig a little deeper into that potential Arizona fit too, because it's actually a fascinating landing spot beyond just the Brissett contract uncertainty. If McCarthy landed with the Cardinals, he'd essentially be stepping into Kyler Murray's old situation in reverse, inheriting a roster with real offensive weapons already in place, most notably a genuine number 1 receiver in Marvin Harrison Jr., while also walking into a defense that's ranked in the bottom half of the league in most advanced metrics over the past several years. It's the kind of situation where McCarthy could realistically put up respectable box score numbers behind a talented pass catcher, even if the defense around him struggles to keep games competitive. And from a value standpoint, one persistent theory floating around league circles suggests the Vikings might actually be best served waiting until after McCarthy survives a potential week 1 as Minnesota's emergency starter before finalizing any deal, since his trade stock could genuinely spike if he's forced into action early and performs well in relief of an injured Murray. There's a real chess match happening here between multiple front offices trying to time this exactly right, and it's one of the more fascinating subplots of the entire NFC North heading into camp. And I want to sit on that Caleb Williams comparison for one more minute, because I don't think we talk enough on this channel about just how validating this entire McCarthy saga has become for the Bears front office's evaluation process. Remember, there were plenty of national voices back during that draft cycle who genuinely debated whether McCarthy's efficient. Low mistake game at Michigan made him the safer long-term bet compared to a higher variance, more chaotic playmaker like Caleb Williams. The Bears obviously saw it differently, betting on Williams' arm talent, playmaking instincts, and sealing over what some evaluators viewed as a more polished, lower risk floor in McCarthy. 2 years later, Williams is coming off a franchise record passing season and a playoff win, while McCarthy is reportedly a phone call away from being dealt for what amounts to spare change in draft capital terms. That's about as clean a vindication of a scouting department's evaluation as you're going to find in this league. And it's a reminder of why Ryan Poles and his personnel staff deserve real credit for trusting their own board over the popular consensus at the time. Here's why all of this actually matters for the Bears, specifically beyond just the schadenfreude of watching a former draft rival struggle. Chicago plays Minnesota twice a year, and the quality of quarterback play the Vikings roll out in those two games has a real impact on this division race. If Kyler Murray simply doesn't work out in that offense, and remember, he's coming off a season that was almost entirely wiped out by a severe foot injury that limited him to just 5 total games. This becomes a Minnesota team that could take a genuine step back and end up picking near the top of next year's draft, looking for its next answer at the position. On the flip side, when Murray is healthy, he's shown he can be one of the more dangerous dual-threat quarterbacks in this entire league, having thrown for close to 3,900 yards with 21 touchdowns against just 11 interceptions and a completion percentage pushing near 70% back in his last full healthy season in 2024. So there's real range of outcomes here for Minnesota, and either direction ends up mattering for how competitive this division actually is around Chicago all season long. If you guys want the Bears to win the NFC North this season, go ahead and smash that like button right now, because we've got plenty more storylines from around the division still to get through. Let's shift over to Detroit, because the Lions just lost one of their best young defensive backs under absolutely stunning circumstances. The team announced they've released cornerback Terrion Arnold, their own first-round pick from the 2024 draft out of Alabama, and I promise you the reason behind this release is going to leave your jaw on the floor. Arnold had genuinely taken a real step forward as a player heading into this decision. In just 8 games this past season, he posted 31 total tackles, 1 interception, and 8 pass deflections, which works out to almost exactly 1 pass breakup per game played. He's never really profiled as a blitzer. He's much more of a true ball hawk in the mold of the corners Alabama tends to produce, and the tape backed that up. Compare that pace to his rookie season, where across 16 full games, he posted comparable tackle numbers, but only 10 total pass deflections and a single fumble recovery. Extrapolate his current per game pace out over a full 16 or 17 game slate, and Arnold was genuinely trending toward roughly 7 additional pass breakups and a noticeably higher interception total than what he'd shown as a rookie. This was a player entering a real breakout window, still on a cost-controlled rookie contract. At a position where Detroit had already spent heavily elsewhere on defense, he looked like one of the better value pieces on that entire roster, and now he's simply gone. Here's the reasoning, and it is every bit as wild as advertised. According to reporting, the Lions released Arnold after he was arrested on felony charges of armed robbery and kidnapping. He had his bond set at $1 million during a Monday hearing in front of a Hillsborough County, Florida judge. Arnold, 23 years old, had been in custody since he voluntarily turned himself in earlier that week. Authorities allege he orchestrated the abduction and beating of 3 men whom he wrongly suspected of stealing luxury goods and around $100,000 in cash from him. According to prosecutors, the alleged victims were abducted just days after cash and high-end items, including Rolex watches and Louis Vuitton bags, were reported stolen from Arnold during an Airbnb stay in the Tampa area. Prosecutors allege that a group of Arnold's associates carried out the actual physical acts, holding, beating, and pistol whipping the victims, and that Arnold himself was not physically present at the scene when it happened, though prosecutors argue he coordinated and directed the plan from a distance, allegedly even watching part of the incident unfold through a live stream one of his associates had set up. Now, in fairness to Arnold, and I think this matters given how serious these allegations are, his representatives have publicly and firmly denied every part of this. A statement released on his behalf said that Arnold categorically denies any involvement in the matters underlying these allegations and maintains his innocence, arguing there is no credible evidence directly linking him to what happened and suggesting prosecutors are leaning heavily on testimony from other individuals involved who may have their own incentives to shift blame in hopes of reducing their own sentences. The judge overseeing the case even acknowledged during the bond hearing that while the charges are serious, carrying a potential life sentence if he's ultimately convicted, prosecutors are not yet at the point of demonstrating an overwhelmingly strong case against him specifically. So this is still very much a legal process that has a long way to play out, and Arnold is entitled to that presumption of innocence just like anyone else facing charges, whatever the ultimate outcome ends up being. I also want to give you a little more context on the actual case itself, because the details that have come out are genuinely stranger than fiction. This all traces back to February when Arnold and several friends were staying at a rental home in Largo, Florida, and reported that more than $200,000 worth of property, including cash and luxury items, had been stolen from the property. Rather than simply letting police investigate, prosecutors allege Arnold and his associates decided to handle things themselves, allegedly luring several men they suspected were involved to a separate apartment under false pretenses before some of Arnold's associates confronted and assaulted them. A total of 7 people were eventually arrested in connection with the case, with 2 of the co-defendants reportedly pleading guilty and agreeing to cooperate with prosecutors as part of their plea arrangements. Arnold was the last of the group taken into custody, with investigators reportedly spending several additional months building their case against him specifically before he was formally charged and voluntarily turned himself in. As part of his release conditions, Arnold had to surrender his passport and was ordered to remain confined to his residence outside of team activities and legal proceedings, at least for now. Still, from a pure roster and football perspective, this is an enormous swing for Detroit, regardless of how the legal case resolves. You're talking about a former first-round investment, a player who is entering a real breakout year, suddenly gone from the building entirely, with real locker room shockwaves and a genuine hole left at cornerback for a team that has Super Bowl aspirations. And look, Bears fans, we play the Lions twice a year too, so any hit to Detroit's talent level on that side of the ball is relevant to how those two matchups play out. It's a legitimately significant story on every level. A human one first and foremost, given the seriousness of the allegations involved, and a football one as a secondary consequence for how this division shakes out.